the moment we have the stretch effect, but of course this is only if I have a cursor, so it's only if I can mouse over this. What happens if I just want to play this by default? What I can add in here is a CSS animation. So this is a new thing that we're going to talk about. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the top of the page because I can add this to any part of the page if I make it once. So in here, I want to add an instruction in. So just like I've got at font face, which is an instruction to CSS, I want to also add in an at keyframes. Now with this, I'm going to add in a name for my animation, and this is going to be called, unsurprisingly, something like animate the type. And then we're going to do something with this. So I'm going to add some curly brackets. So think of this as a timeline. So I can start at 0 and at 100% it does something else. So what do I want to do for this animate type? Animate type is something that I've called it. I could call this bounce or spin or whatever I want to call this, as long as it's at keyframes and whatever you want to call it in here. What I'm going to put in here is 0%. And what do I want to look at 0%? Well, I'm going to use some curly brackets in here as well and open these up. So I've got a box inside a box. So I've got my keyframes and then a box which says what this should be at 0%. And then later on, I'm going to add in 100% and curly brackets and open those up. So I've got this box which has one box and two boxes. So I'm going to move my kind of stretch thing from my header, which is down here. So I'm going to take this, and I'm going to cut this out, and I'm going to put this one in 0. There we go. Just kind of indent that. And then at 100%, I want the hover state. So I'm going to take that and move this in. So I've got those two things in there. So my animation is going to go between 0, which is 1 and 1, so no stretch, and at 100% it's going to stretch fully. So how do I use this now? I've set this up, and if I go back to the page right now, there's nothing happening. The reason there's nothing happening is I cut this out of the page. So I always want my header to be animated. So I don't want it on hover. I can get rid of header hover. I don't want it to be on a transition, so I'm going to get rid of that. What I want it to be on is an animation. I'm using the CSS animation now. Animation. Now, which animation do I want to use? Well, what did I call my animation? I called this animate-type. Animate-type. The first thing I want to do is how long is this going to be over? I'm going to do this over 3 seconds. Let's try that. So let's see how that looks. So there we go, 3 seconds. If I refresh the page, 1, 2, 3, and it snaps back. Now the reason it snaps back is it runs once and then resets to what it should be. Now I want to keep this running forever. So after 3 seconds, I'm going to add in infinite. So I want this to be on an infinite loop. So now if I go back, what we'll see is it stretches and then it stretches from the start again. Now, of course, what I want to do is stretch this out and then stretch it back in, stretch it back out, stretch it back in. Now there's one more thing, there's two ways to do this actually. So there's one way, which is we could add this at 50% and then 100% to go back on itself. So this could be 50% and then 100% is the final version again. So this goes back to this. Now I'm just gonna basically make my life a lot easier. So 0 to 100%. I want this to go back the other way by adding in alternate in here. So I've got an animated type that's 3 seconds, that loops infinitely, and also does the alternate. It starts at 0, goes to 100%, then it goes to 100% to 0, 0 to 100%, 100% to 0, and onwards. So now what I get is a stretch that goes back in. There we go, lovely stuff. What I have here is not what our final version actually is. Our final version looks something a bit more like that. Now notice that there's font weight changes in this. So if I quickly add in some font weight changes into my animation, what do I get? Let's have a look. So if I add into my animation my transform origin, but also a font weight from 400 to a font weight of 700. What does this look like? So let's have a look. Notice there's this weird click going on And the reason for that is it doesn't know how to change between 400 and 700. It's kind of guessing and then kind of flicking to the next version. So it feels stepped. Now, the issue with that is basically these typefaces aren't variable. They don't know how to change between 400 and 700. Now, one of the new things in web technology is this idea of variable fonts. Luckily, Inter, the font that we're using, does have a variable font version of this. Not every single font does. In fact, only about 10% of fonts do. So we're actually quite lucky that we're using a font that does have a variable font. So what we're going to do in the next video is actually make this look good. We'll actually add some variable fonts to this page.